Hi, so they gave me the session before lunch, which should be fun, because I assume I have your attention already, but we'll try and keep this insightful, we'll try and keep this crisp. Thank you so much to all the panelists for taking the time out to be here. So one of the things that we've seen, right from the first opening keynote is technology and how it is disrupting the way organizations and teams work today. But we really wanted to touch upon the people aspect a little bit, right? And what better way to do it is than to hear from practitioners from the industries themselves. We've got a really interesting bunch of panelists on the stage today. We would have loved to have questions from the audience, but I think we're a little bit limited in time. But if you would like to connect with any of us, please feel free to reach out to us after this panel. We'll jump right into it. I'm going to start with Puneet. Thank you so much for being here. Just very quickly, how do you define a high-performance team, and how has that definition changed for you from, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago in the context of the disruptors, not just Gen AI, but I think working models have changed, technologies have come and gone. So what's changed for you?
Sure. So it was interesting listening to the MCs compare the Indian cricket team to how you create high-performing teams. So I would say the definition of high-performing team matters differently to different people. Matters differently to sports, matter differently to us in software, matter differently to other panelists we were hearing earlier today about automobile industry. But I think there are a couple core elements of a high-performing team. And the one is any high-performing team has to have empathy. Empathy towards how they're treating not just their customers, how they're treating the other members of the team, and how they're treating the people who are providing them the projects and managing that. And then the other aspect of a high-performing team, I feel, is having humility, right? Earlier, Pari was talking about in his talk that how the principal engineers are going to be able to take on more projects just because the AI is going to help enable the other members of the team. But unless and until you have humility, unless and until you're going to be able to work in that core ecosystem as the technology is shifting, those elements are going to matter when you're defining high-performing teams. So that's, the definition's going to continue to evolve, as you mentioned, 3 to 4 years. I work in an industry which is very legacy. We work on mainframes. Anybody here work on mainframe? Building a high-performing team for a mainframe is very different than building a high-performing team that is working on AI and Gen AI. So.
Awesome, and thank you for that. And I think speaking of legacy and incumbent industries, Thomas, you're from automotive engineer through and through.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah. I think for you, as a leader from an industry where the core product hasn't changed, right? It is still the car. What is a high-performing team to you in the context of all of this technology that gets talked about?
No, thanks for the question. Before I come to that, just a personal comment, because I grew up in Brazil. I lived in Europe 25 years, now live in the UK. And I've been coming to India 2.5 years now, since I joined JLR, which is part of the Tata company. I'm super proud to be here. I think it's a great conference. I personally believe it's the next decade is the decade of India. Because if I see the 500 people we have here in Bangalore, the level of really innovation, ambition that they have. If I scale that throughout India, it's unbelievable. So congratulations to all of you, and keep pushing on that. Now coming to the automotive. Yes, I was born with Matchbox in my hand, and I'm a car guy. And I've been 25 years in the business. But what is super interesting is that although many people think this is old and traditional and old-fashioned, it has been transforming a lot in the last years. And I think it's been, if you look very broadly, it's 4 waves. The first wave was a very mechanical product. Then we started adding mechatronics to it. Then the software came, which is actually on board, but also in the cloud. And the data is starting now. And if you think about the data, in my view, the car will be one of the biggest sensors that you're going to have mid and long-term driving around. So it's going to be huge. It's going to be huge for us. And if you look on that thread, talking about high-performance organization, of course, you need to transform your organization and your capabilities throughout this era. And it's not an or discussion, it's and. We still have mechanical engineers, mechatronic engineers, software people, and we're adding now, of course, data scientists and new capabilities. That's one. The other one, and we shouldn't forget, is the leadership. And I think Pari talked about it in the very beginning. The leadership changed a lot as technology evolves and people evolve. And I remember just one quote, when I started in my company, my first mentor told me, you just do what your boss tells you to do. And that's what I did for the first 2 years, and I started to discover that's horrible. Imagine if yesterday we had a great team event, yeah? Average age 23 and a half years, our engineers. If I tell these engineers, you just do what I tell you to do, you'll be gone after 1 minute. So it's super important, not only technology-wise, to look what's happening and to increase capabilities, but also to adapt the leadership style.
Awesome. So you heard it from him, don't listen to your boss, basically. But thank you. I think two interesting perspectives, but Ash, I'm going to bring you in at this point because the role that you play in your organization is completely different, very customer-facing, and so I think Puneet called it empathy, and customer empathy is a big part of that, right? So what do you think, just from a high-performance team, are engineering teams or development teams missing on the customer experience side of it?
Yeah, so when you said let's talk about high performance, I thought you wanted me to talk about the Australian cricket team.
We took the World Cup, so...
Take care, Ash.
It's always a sensitive topic whenever I visit India. Yeah, so as you pointed out, I'm in quite a different role compared to a lot of my fellow panelists, and I'm a customer of many of our engineering teams, and I absolutely agree in the statements around empathy and leadership and compassion and the like. But for me, one of the things that I always like to see these teams do is, really have an understanding of the business and have an understanding of the customer. And I've worked in Asia Pacific for my entire career, and I'm a big advocate of getting people to come and learn the region, learn the business, meet customers, understand, really where they, can add value, but more importantly, the impact that they provide on, the success of the company. And I think a lot of people forget that, depending on whatever sort of service delivery function that they're in, the work that's being done, and, much of that work happens here in India, has a huge impact, on the success of the company, both in terms of financial outcomes, but the ability to be able to grow and expand and do all of that sort of stuff as well. So I really encourage, engineering teams or service-orientated teams in general to be very empathetic towards the needs of the customer and get deep into the business and understand what those business outcomes need to look like.
Yeah. And then, sort of all of it put together is really the crux or a microcosm of like a high powerful team. Ajay, you come from a GCC, so you're local. They come from, locations which are proximate to the business and to the customer. What should a GCC leader know, right? Because y'all are historically not proximate to where the business is. It takes inorganic effort. So yeah, what would you sort of add to that from a GCC perspective?
Thanks for the question. Depending on where you are and what kind of field you're in, so for deep tech companies, usually the innovation follows a hyperlinear growth path, and it's usually not following the customer, it's the other way around, and it's about you innovate and then you try to get customers on board. So proximity to customers is important, but may not be relatively as important as it is for a few other segments. Having said that, it is definitely important to learn to actually really understand the applicability of what you build. So when we built Pure here, when we started in 2022, one of the focuses we had was to build a charter around self-sufficiency. And what it means is trying to not just build a highly performant engineering organization, but also to have disciplines on product management, have a vision for global leadership, which we achieved in 1 year, to basically break down geographical barriers, which meant that leaders here would have teams overseas and vice versa, right? So to have that. So once you have something like that, then you can have programs that institutionalize your interactions with customers. Maybe you travel a lot more. Maybe you're part of an executive sponsorship for a certain set of customers which you go and learn. And essentially, you hire talent which is really global in nature. Like when we hired product-facing talent, it was really global in nature with people who have done that multiple times. When we hired engineers, we did not hire new grads for a very long time. We started hiring the senior most architects, and then we went down. So we have, in a way, an inversely tilted pyramid of technical talent, so that you create an environment where you can foster growth for people who are coming in at different sections of the pyramid. So that's basically what we did.
No, that's awesome and good sort of practical in terms of how to go about doing it. So what outcomes, because you're relatively young compared to a lot of the GCCs that operate in the ecosystem, right? What outcomes have you been able to sort of showcase early on, as well as of now for the global org?
Yeah, so I think we've been here for about 2.5 years, and in this time, I think the teams here, although are new to Pure, I mean, these are really veterans in the industry, like people who have really done this multiple times at multiple places. And we've been able to deliver independent modules and features that are very critical. And so much so that in me, I mean, we have the leadership of the entire software line for one of our main products based out of Bangalore.
Yeah.
So things of that sort has happened in 2 years, and again, that's about sticking to the philosophy of why we came. We did not come to India for about 13 years after we started the company, or 15 years after we started the company, because the idea was to be inside Silicon Valley. But then, because we needed talent, we came here. So we came here for talent, let's hire for that talent, right? And basically hire the best of that talent. And when you're hiring the best of the talent, have the same standards that you have anywhere, so people feel like you're on par with everybody else. So if you're in the services, if any of you have served, you see somebody else with the uniform, you know that he has come through the same drill that you have come through. And then it's about creating that kind of an equal society inside the company.
Yeah,
basically.
like parity, basically, in terms of the talent. Awesome, that's great. Ash, I'm going to bring you back in. I know in theory, it's indispensable, right? Customer empathy and an understanding, but how easy or difficult is it to actually instill it in engineering teams? Are leaders missing something in terms of the larger puzzle, in terms of creating this in their day-to-day jobs?
So I should say that at Snowflake, I get to work with amazing engineering leaders, just to caveat that. So I think it can be, but what I've noticed over recent years, it's become easier.
Yeah.
And I think that, I've been working in technology for many, many years, and, engineering was always seen as one of those sort of back of house functions, right? And I think more recently it's come to the forefront, even coming to conferences like this and seeing, many engineering leaders that are talking about business and business priorities and how technology is driving business priorities has really changed.
Sure.
The other thing is I believe, the role of technology and the role of engineering has become very strategic for almost every organization. So whilst a few years ago, or maybe tens of years ago, it was maybe seen as a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Now it's incredibly strategic. And as we look at the advancement of data and AI, that's coming to the forefront. Working on the GTM side of the business at Snowflake, I've been with the company for just on 2.5 years. When I first joined, a lot of the conversations that we were having with organizations were very much around data platforms and driving down cost and, maybe increasing sort of visibility into customers and identifying growth opportunities. But those conversations were very much with sort of the head of data or whatever. Now, I look at the EBCs that we run, it's board after board after board after board that are really trying to understand, what's going on. And I think that represents a great opportunity for technology teams and engineering teams to really lift their profiles and get more involved in the business.
Sure, awesome. And how do you recommend you build this, right? Like from personal experience, are there specific programs or initiatives that you think leaders should take to instill like customer experience as a culture?
Yeah, so I think I touched on that a little bit in my first response, where I think it's about getting people immersed into the business. We I look for opportunities to do that all the time, and not even just with our engineering teams, but even some of our programs teams that might sit in headquarters. Any opportunity that we have to get them kind of involved in the field and as part of the business and really understanding what they do has a big impact on the success of the company. Any opportunity to do that sort of stuff is amazing. Here in India, we've got a GCC in Pune, and there's about 500 people there. Last time I was in India, coincidentally, we went there and announced the expansion of that facility. We're going to double it in the next couple of years. It's an amazing space, by the way. But we use the team here, our own GCC team, a lot here in customer conversations. And they love doing it. Like, it was this thing where all of a sudden you ask, and they love the opportunity to get involved in these types of things. So, my advice, I guess, in summary, is just look for those opportunities to get teams engaged in customer conversations and, front of house conversations more and more.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. That helps. Thomas, so Ajay spoke of the build, right? I think in terms of hiring talent grounds up, actually top down, and then building teams around them. But you come from, I think, an organization and an industry that had to transform the existing, and you spoke about it in terms of mechanical to data, right? The transition almost. What actions did you take, right? So to prep the team for the change, essentially, what did you have to run?
So I think it's at least three things. The first of them is very often you're confronted with a discussion of people who are, for instance, mechanical engineers like myself. Am I still important in future? The answer is always yes. But of course, there's a huge, I said we're adding capabilities. Yeah. We're not replacing in our business. But there's still a huge effort to upskill our organization towards the new ones. That's number one. The second one, being in a manufacturing-driven organization, there is a huge task for us throughout the last years and in future, how we automate our processes in engineering. We're very siloed in the way we operate, and everyone has a specific tool, a specific data that they generate, a specific way they operate, and you want that all to be connected, and actually connected to manufacturing, connected to the customer. So that's one big thing we're working actively to get it end-to-end connected.
We can help you with that, by the way.
You are already. You are already. Yeah. Which is amazing, and I think a great opportunity. But the last one, the trickiest one, but I think the most important is for us is it's employee engagement. Because I think we have amazing brands. Just to remember, Range Rover, this Defender, Jaguar, and Discovery. You can buy all of them. Amazing cars. They attract people, which is great, but we want to retain people, the best talent. So what we have been doing a lot is giving our employees accountability. So we changed completely the operating mode of the business. Everything is running agile. For people who are working in software, it's natural. For an automotive business, it's fully unnatural. 16,000 engineers and all programs working in agile, giving people really accountability for them. And also changing the culture of the company. So really changing the way we lead, the way we engage with them. So really trying to retain and grow the best talent in our company. I think that's the most important part. Otherwise, you are lost.
Yeah, absolutely. And that must have been quite a change management exercise, I would assume, for the
it is, and we learn every day. Yeah, the car as a product is so complex. Yeah. It's so complex, and structuring an agile, structuring each team was the easiest part. How to connect all of them in value streams. That's the part we're learning now.
Yeah, and you make it sound so easy. I'm sure it wasn't. Puneet, two-part questions. I think one is, there are certain traits, and I think Thomas talked about the evolution of the traits that they look for in teams, but there must be traits that have stayed static, traits that have not gone out of fashion, so to speak, while others have come in. And aside from the technology aspects of it, what are some of those traits that you think are going to stand the test of time? And what are the new ones that have come into the picture for engineers to build?
Yeah, I think, Thomas touched on something that I want to reflect on, which is retention, right? So when you're building high-performing teams, a lot of times there are a lot of things that you could do to build teams. And as Ajay was talking about building teams, it's retaining those teams and keeping them high performing, right? That becomes a very, very important part. And what happens over time as the teams are performing and they're building, they get complacent. They're like, well, we are doing this. We know how to do this. You don't have to keep telling us that. So that is one trait where I feel the teams who continue to perform and continue to innovate themselves have that fire in them. And especially the high-performing teams typically would, right? Because these are people who want to go take charge, continue to innovate themselves. So how do we keep fueling them? How do we help them do that? You touched on leadership. Middle management becomes a really important aspect of that. They have to help the team see where they can innovate. And that, I think, is the trait that's not going to change, regardless of how much technology moves forward. I think the new ones, as the technology, we talked a lot about Gen AI. We touched on some of the predictive AI. One of the charts that I think it was in Pari's presentation this morning about, there are teams today who are spending their own money to go get tools because the companies aren't willing to do that. That just is something that we'll just have to do to help the teams see where they can come in and innovate themselves, right? Sure. They don't have to rely on the organizations. They can take charge on themselves. So I think these are the traits that we hope the teams will come to pick up and build on that. And I think we see that today, like I mentioned earlier, right? We work on legacy technology. It's not very sexy. It's not very great, but we find ways to get the teams innovating on that. Our center here in Pune has been growing, and we're blessed that we have very low attrition just because we've been able to do that and help create that.
Yeah. So I think almost that they're paying for their own subscriptions means they're ready to up level. It's almost like they're giving you the sign that they're willing to go above and beyond.
Right. And I think that's when I talk about the leadership and leadership being able to identify within those teams, that is the key trait of that middle management. When you see a team, when you see members of the team wanting to do that, wanting to learn more, and if you're not fueling that, you're going to start losing the energy, and that becomes an essential part of keeping those teams engaged.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. So, very useful, but we all know as leaders that what gets measured gets done. So how do you measure success? What do KPIs look like? I can already see a couple of smiles around the panel. Thomas, I wanted to start with you. What metrics or KPIs do you hold, really, really important when you're looking at a high-performing team in this construct?
Let me start just enterprise-wide, So we're pivoting the company into modern luxury. So we're not copying Chinese. We're not copying the Germans, where I come from. We want to be really a modern luxury company. So for us, it's value, not volume. So that's the first one. Because many people count number of cars. We don't count that. It's about value. Second one, I think it's a difficult one still to measure, but we're putting a lot of effort. How do we transform into customer experience-centric? Because we strongly believe our product is part of the experience, and the experience much longer than that. It's end-to-end. So there's something there we need to learn how to measure. Today we measure customer NPS, but it's specific to one part of it, so I think we need to integrate that. When it comes to innovation, for us, there's definitely something around collaboration. We do a lot with startups. Plug and Play is a great partner where we have platforms globally where we act with. The Tata ecosystem, all the companies, all the verticals, amazing companies, so we do a lot with them. So that's something we don't measure, but we do. But I think in my area, time to market is important for the things that we focus on. It's not everything. But there's something around, especially now coming on what touched before, software-defined vehicles. So how do we rebuild the architecture in a way that we can deploy customer experience extremely fast and extremely personal? Because I think a customer in Middle East will want to have something different than a customer in India and a customer in the US. So that's where it's moving towards.
Right. Awesome.
And so I just want to forget what is centric for us is employee engagement. Employer NPS. It's in the core of everything we do.
Yeah, I mean, great employees build great businesses, I guess. So, okay, awesome. I think you, but also called out that the customer experience metric is a little bit, limited in the understanding. And this is actually not the first time we hear it. This is, in reality, we see a lot of teams playing catch up in terms of being able to measure customer experience. So, Ash, to the audience here, what metrics would you probably look at if you're going to add customer experience to the stack that Thomas called out?
Yeah, so I think, there's organizational-wide metrics, as Thomas touched on, and, as a public company, we report on those every quarter, and, net retention is a really big one for us, because if our customers are growing with us, then they're being successful, and we're doing something right. I think more functional to my team and the way that we look at partnerships is in terms of two-way value. And we want to make sure that the partners that we're working with are being successful. And, it's not just about driving our objectives, but it's driving our joint partnership objectives. So we look at things like partnership engagement, capability that we've got around the partnership, revenue at the end of the day is a pretty important one as well. And then on a project by project basis, I drive my team crazy on this, but I always ask what success looks like. I'm a big fan of this whole concept of working backwards, and I worked for one of the big CSPs many years ago that has this concept of writing a press release at the start of a project. Many of you will know who I'm talking about. And I think that really helps you clarify what you want to measure and what are those goals that you want to put in place at the start, because you know what you want success to look like.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I'm going to take that back for my team. Thank you. Ajay, again, the outcomes I think are clear, but how do you follow through on it almost in terms of creating an impact to the business? So within the construct of the organization that you lead, are there specific behaviors that you reward? How do you look at the rewards and recognition to ensure high performance? How do you sustain it, basically?
Yeah, actually great points made. Somebody spoke about NPS, so I'll just talk about that for a minute. For a company like ours, our NPS is over 80%, which is more than iPhone, which is like way high. And that is a resultant of how simple the products are to use. Yeah. And that's one of the major impacts that we look at. And based on how you actually build your products, is it easily adoptable, and is it a great experience for the customer? So simplicity needs to be built in, and we regard it as a very high metric to measure the impact, basically. Outside of that, of course, there are many ingredients that go into that in terms of, do you have a 360-degree thought process, which is depth in terms of scale performance, or breadth in case of impact to customers, simplicity, UI, UX, and those things. And definitely, I think we have smart engineers, so people have a high degree of locus of control, so they want to feel like they've contributed. So it's about how hands-on you are. And these are a couple of things that we look and we reward heavily in our organization.
Awesome. Thank you. We're out of time, but one final question to you, Puneet, because you come from an organization that is highly globalized, headcount everywhere, all over the world. In terms of an extremely globally distributed, engineering team, what are some of the challenges to sustaining high performance, right? So we've talked about the build, we've talked about the measurement, but are there specific challenges that we need to be aware of, or pitfalls almost?
Yeah, I think collaboration becomes a really big issue, especially when working in all different time zones. So how do you get around that collaboration? How do you not make someone in India be up at midnight to talk to someone else in US, or someone in China working another crazy shift? So managing the time, managing the work-life balance becomes a really critical part of it. And I think where we have had some success is making sure that we're sharing that empathy that I talked about. Is that not just empathy towards the customers, but empathy towards your fellow engineers, and making sure that they are not getting burnt out by doing that. So I think at the tail end of it, it all comes down to human factor becomes a more important thing in any organization, be it high-performing team, be it the globalization. So what we do on a day in and day out basis is really not measure productivity. And you asked the question about measurement. KPIs are my enemy. Even though I'm an engineer, I shouldn't talk about it. But that we are all engineers. We know how to manipulate numbers very easily. Yeah. So we can build.
Completely attest to that. Yeah, absolutely.
But what it comes down to really, what are you measuring? And to me, it's the human factor, and that's hard to measure, but something we talk about a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're out of time, but one final sort of question that I wanted to maybe run all of you through. No time to think. Figurative gun to the head. One non-negotiable trait or a characteristic of a high-performing team. I'll start with you, Ajay.
Yeah, I would say tenacity.
Tenacity, okay. Ash?
It's always hard to pick one, but I'd probably say curiosity.
Puneet?
I'm going to stick with my empathy. I think that's, yeah.
I'll say be human.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. We're out of time. Thank you, everyone.